The Montana Territory in late October was a study in finality. The aspens had long since shed their gold, leaving bone-white branches to scratch at a sky the color of old pewter. Winter was not coming. It was crouching, waiting for the signal to pounce, near Deadwater Creek, where the water ran low and black over slick stones. Elijah Rourke worked his land with the grim patience of a man who expects nothing from it. His homestead was a small scar of order in a vast, chaotic wilderness, a sturdy cabin built of new pine, a barn, and a corral holding 2 geldings and a milk cow. The new cabin, he still called it in his mind, though it had stood for almost 10 years. It was the other one, the one that had turned to ash and charcoal down by the creek bed. That still felt like home. Elijah was a weather-beaten man, carved down to the essentials of bone and muscle. His beard was more gray than brown, and his eyes held the flat, distant look of the high plains. He lived in solitude, and he preferred it. Solitude was honest. It did not pretend to offer comfort and then snatch it away in a roar of flame and smoke. He had lived this way for 10 years, 1 month and 14 days. He measured his life by the absence of hers. He was a widower, but the word felt thin. It did not capture the hollowing out, the sensation of being a man consumed by loss until he was little more than a husk animated by chores. He was mending a split-rail fence, his movements economical and sure. When the air changed, the wind, which had been a low moan all day, picked up a sudden, high-pitched whine. It smelled of iron and ice. A storm was brewing, a bad one, and it was coming fast. He gathered his tools, his eyes scanning the bruised purple horizon. He locked the chickens in their coop, double-checked the latch on the barn door, and carried a final load of firewood onto the porch. He was inside, stoking the pot-bellied stove, when night fell like a dropped curtain. Darkness in the territory was absolute. It swallowed the mountains and the trees, leaving only the sound of the wind, and, tonight, another sound. At first, he thought it was the wind tearing at the eaves, but it came again, a horse whickering in distress, and the crunch of boots on the gravel path. Elijah's hand went to the rifle resting on the pegs by the door. He did not get visitors, hunters sometimes, or surveyors, but never at night, and never in a storm like this. He moved to the window, peering through the glass, but saw only his own reflection in the dark pane. A sharp, hard knock echoed through the small cabin, not a polite rap, but a summons. He lifted the rifle, its weight familiar, and cracked the door. The wind tore it from his grip, slamming it open against the interior wall. A figure stood on his porch, silhouetted against the churning blackness. It was a woman, or perhaps a slight boy. She was soaked, her clothes plastered to her frame. A wide-brimmed hat dripped water onto the planks, and a long rifle was held casually in the crook of her arm, muzzle down. "Are you Elijah Rourke?" Her voice was low, rough with cold. He kept his own rifle leveled. "Who's asking?" She didn't move, seemingly unbothered by the gun or the rain, which was now turning to stinging sleet. "My name is Mara." She reached inside her drenched canvas coat, a slow, deliberate movement. He tensed, his finger moving to the trigger guard. She pulled out not a weapon, but a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. "I was told to give you this." He stared at the packet. "I don't know any, Mara. You'd best move on." "There's nowhere to move on to," she said, her voice flat. "And you'll want to read this." "She said you would." "She who?" The woman stepped forward into the faint light spilling from the doorway. She was young, maybe 23 or 4, with dark hair plastered to her skull and eyes so dark they looked black. She was worn to a razor's edge, exhausted but not broken. There was a hardness in her face that matched the land around them. "Clara." Elijah's world stopped. The name was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was a name he never spoke, a name he barely allowed himself to think. "Clara's dead," he whispered, the words stiff. "No," the woman said. She pushed the packet toward him. "Not then. She died 2 months ago. She gave me this for you." His hand was shaking as he took the small parcel. He fumbled with the oilskin, his fingers numb. Inside was a letter, folded thick. The paper softened and creased with travel. He stepped back into the cabin, toward the lantern on the table, his rifle forgotten. He did not invite her in, but she followed, dripping a puddle onto the clean planked floor. She shut the door against the howl of the storm. Elijah unfolded the letter. The scent of mildew and thyme rose from it, but it was the handwriting that made him stumble. It was small, precise, with a distinctive loop on the C. He would know it anywhere. He had burned the few examples of it he had left, thinking the memory would burn with them. He was wrong. "My dearest Elijah." His vision blurred. He gripped the table to steady himself. This was a trick, a cruel, elaborate hoax. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and our daughter has found you. Her name is Mara. I have kept her safe, but I cannot any longer. I am sick, and my time is short." Daughter? The word made no sense. They had not been blessed with children. "There is so much I never told you. I was a coward. I ran, Elijah. I ran from him, and I ran from the truth. I let you believe I died in that fire. It was the only way. Please, protect her. She is all that is good of me. Tell her what I couldn't. Tell her about the man I was before I met you, and what I became after. Forgive me." It was signed simply Clara. He read it twice, 3 times. The paper shook. This is a lie. The young woman, Mara, had not moved. She stood by the door, water pooling around her boots. Her rifle was still in her arm. "It's not. Clara died 10 years ago," he said, his voice rising, cracking with a decade of suppressed grief and a new, terrible confusion. "I buried her." "What did you bury?" Mara asked. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his rage. "The deputy's report said the cabin burned to the foundations. They found ashes and remnants." He saw it again. The memory was always there, waiting just beneath the surface. The smell of smoke on the morning air. The ride back. His gut clenched with a sick dread. And the ruin. The cabin wasn't just burned. It was annihilated. Blackened timbers. A chimney stack standing like a tombstone. He had clawed through the ash and charcoal, his hands raw, searching for something, for anything. He found the charred clasp of her mother's locket and a few bits of bone so brittle they turned to powder when he touched them. He had put those ashes in a pine box and buried it under the tall spruce on the hill. "She was in there," he insisted, more to himself than to her. "She wasn't," Mara said. "She ran—" Elijah looked at this stranger, this impossible woman carrying a ghost's words. He was overwhelmed, his mind a snarl of questions. If Clara lived, his entire life, his 10 years of penance, was a fraud. If this woman was lying, it was the cruelest act he had ever known. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would she do this?" "She was afraid," Mara said. "She spent her whole life afraid. Now I want to know why. The letter said you had the truth." "I have no truth for you," he said, throwing the letter onto the table. "I don't know you, and I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "I'm not playing a game," she snapped, her voice finally flashing with an anger that matched his own. "I rode 600 miles with that letter. I'm not here for your shelter. I'm not here for your money. I'm here for what she told me I was owed. Answers." She was firm, demanding. There was no plea in her eyes. She was a creditor, here to collect a debt he didn't know he had. The storm raged, rattling the windows. He was trapped. He could not throw her out into that. It would be murder. And despite the chaos she had just unleashed, a sliver of him, a dark, terrified part, needed to know. "You can take the cot by the stove," he said, his voice flat and dead. "We talk in the morning. When the storm breaks, you leave." She nodded, accepting the terms. "I'll leave when I have the truth." She unslung her rifle and leaned it against the wall near her pack. He watched her every move, wary. She was a stranger, but she knew his wife's name. She knew his wife's hand. That night, Elijah did not sleep. He sat in his chair, the rifle across his knees, and watched the fire burn down to embers. His mind circled back to the fire, the real fire, the smell of kerosene he'd convinced himself he imagined, the way the flames had been too hot, too fast, the fact that her body was never truly found, only ashes. He had accepted it because he had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Now, the unthinkable was sitting on his cot, breathing his air. The next day dawned cold and bright, the storm having scrubbed the sky clean and left a glittering coat of frost on the world. The silence in the cabin was thick. Elijah made coffee, the smell of it filling the small space. He slammed a mug down on the table in front of her. She was already awake, dressed, her pack neatly repacked by the door. She looked less like a drowned rat and more like a wolf, lean, watchful, and coiled. "Speak," Elijah commanded, sitting opposite her. Mara wrapped her cold hands around the hot mug but didn't drink. "She told me she was married once, to a good man, a homesteader in Montana. She told me she lost him." "She lost me?" Elijah scoffed. "She left me. She let me think she was dead." "She told me she survived a fire," Mara continued, ignoring him. "She fled south. She lived in Denver for the last 8 years, working as a laundress. She never spoke of her past, not until the end." Elijah's throat felt tight. "And you, this daughter?" "I was born in Denver. She raised me in secret. We moved from rooming house to rooming house. She was always looking over her shoulder, always telling me to be quiet, to not be seen." "That doesn't make sense. If she was free, why hide?" Mara's dark eyes fixed on him. "She wasn't free. She was hiding. From the man she ran from before the fire. From the man she said you knew about." Elijah's blood ran cold. I knew nothing." "She died 2 months ago," Mara said, her voice dropping. "In an infirmary. Her lungs were bad, the bleach in the lye from the laundry. She died in a charity ward." He flinched. The image of Clara, the woman who loved wildflowers and the open sky, dying in a cramped, foul-smelling room in a city. It was a violation. "At the end," Mara whispered, leaning forward. "She was confused. She kept whispering your name, Elijah, over and over. And she made me promise. She gave me the letter and the last of her money. She said, 'Go to him. He's the only one who can tell you the truth. He's the only one who can keep you safe.'" Elijah stood up, knocking his chair over. "Safe from what? Keep you safe from what? This is madness." He was tormented. 10 years of grief had been a clean, sharp pain. This was a festering wound. Could Clara have faked her death? The betrayal was staggering. And why? And how could this woman exist? He and Clara had been married for 5 years. This woman was 23. The math was impossible. "She was a liar," Elijah spat. "She lied to me. She lied to you." "Then tell me what she was lying about," Mara challenged him, standing to meet his gaze. "The letter said, 'Tell her what I couldn't. Tell me. What happened before she met you? Who was she? Why would she burn her life down and walk away?'" Elijah turned his back on her. He stared out the window at the snow-dusted yard. He was walled off, the old defenses slamming shut. "She was my wife. She was quiet. She came from back east. She didn't like the winters." He was giving her stones, not bread. "That's not the truth," Mara said, her voice laced with frustration. "That's just words. What happened?" "What happened is she died," he roared, spinning back to her. "She died, and I buried her, and you come here with your ghost letter and your lies and try to dig her up. I won't have it." "I'm not leaving," Mara said, Her voice was quiet again, but absolute. "I slept in alleys to get here. I sold my horse for food and stole another one to make the last 100 miles. I am not leaving this valley until I know who I am, and you are the only one left who can tell me." Elijah looked at her. He saw the desperation, but beneath it, he saw an iron will that matched his own. He saw her exhaustion, and he saw the rifle by the door. She was not a threat, perhaps, but she was a problem, and he was trapped. He was trapped by the storm, trapped by her presence, and trapped by the horrifying possibility that she was telling the truth. "Fine," he said, the word torn from him. "You want to stay? You stay, but this is a homestead, not a hotel. You work. I don't give charity." "I don't want any," she replied. A grim, reluctant truce settled. The mistrust between them was so thick he could taste it, metallic and cold as the morning air. The next few days passed in a strained, heavy silence. They worked. She was not, he noted with grudging respect, soft. She woke before him, had the fire going, and was out checking the snares he'd set before he'd even pulled his boots on. She mucked the stalls, split firewood with a steady, practiced swing, and handled his horses with a calm hand. She worked as if work was the only thing holding her together. They moved around each other in the small cabin like two wary predators. They ate their suppers, mostly salt pork and beans, in silence. He would watch her when she wasn't looking. He searched her face for some sign of Clara. The eyes, perhaps. Clara's eyes had been dark, but this woman's gaze was harder, more assessing. There was no softness in her. One afternoon, he was repairing a harness in the barn, his mind drifting back to the letter, to the impossibility of it. He was angry, his movements jerky. The awl slipped, punching deep into the palm of his left hand. He cursed, a sharp, violent sound. Blood welled, dark and immediate, dripping onto the dusty floor. He wrapped his kerchief around it, but the cloth was filthy and the blood soaked through it in seconds. He stalked into the cabin, heading for the whiskey jug he used for wounds. Mara was at the table, cleaning her rifle. She looked up, saw his hand, and stood. "Sit," she commanded. "It's nothing." "It's bleeding on the floor. Sit." She pushed him into a chair. She went to her pack, not his supplies. She pulled out a clean strip of linen, a small brown bottle of carbolic, and a tin of salve. She did not ask permission. She unwrapped his bloody kerchief, her touch firm and impersonal. She poured the stinging carbolic onto the wound. He hissed, clenching his jaw, but did not pull away. Her fingers were deft as she cleaned the gash. She was all business, but it was the first human touch he had permitted himself in 10 years. Her proximity was unsettling. She smelled of pine, gunpowder, and the cold air. When the wound was clean, she applied the salve and wrapped the linen bandage tight. "It'll hold," she said, stepping back. He pulled his hand back, flexing his fingers. The bandage was neat. "Where did you learn that?" "You learn all sorts of things when there's no one else to do them," she said, returning to her rifle. The tension had not broken, but it had changed. It was a small gesture, a simple bandage, but it was a thaw. That night, when he passed her the stew pot, their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. The world outside the cabin, however, remained indifferent to their truce. The wilderness was stark, and it was hungry. The next morning, Elijah went to the barn before dawn. The horses were restless, stamping and blowing in their stalls. He grabbed his rifle and circled the perimeter. Near the chicken coop, in the thin layer of new snow, he found them. Tracks. Not a lone coyote. They were large, deep, and numerous. A wolf pack. They had been close, testing the fences, smelling the livestock. He looked at the tracks, his jaw tightening. The secrets inside his cabin were a poison, threatening to undo his past. The hunger outside was a physical threat, promising to undo his future. He looked back at the cabin, where a thin plume of smoke was just beginning to rise from the chimney. She was awake, and for the first time in a decade, he felt an unwelcome, unfamiliar emotion. It was not grief. It was responsibility. He checked the load in his rifle and headed back to the house, the prints of the wolves following him in the half-light. Mara's presence in the cabin ripped Elijah's sleep to shreds. The quiet, ordered rituals of his grief had been violated, and the past he had nailed shut was prying itself open. His nights, once empty and still, became a fever. He dreamed not of the Clara he had loved, the one who smiled at him over a cup of steam, her hands dusted with flour, but of a different woman, a frantic, pale Clara, her hair undone, her eyes wide with a terror he did not recognize. He dreamed of fire, not the roar of it, but the heat, the oppressive, suffocating smell of kerosene and burning pine. He dreamed of smoke so thick it choked him, and through the smoke, he heard a sound he had never heard in his waking life, a baby's cry, thin and desperate, cutting through the crackle of the flames. He would wake with a gasp, his heart hammering, the blankets tangled around his legs. He would be sweating, though the cabin was cold. In the pre-dawn gloom, he would see her outline on the cot, Mara, the ghost, the proof. She slept lightly, like an animal, one arm thrown over her face. She was the source of this torment, the key that had unlocked this dark room in his mind. He began to recall moments he had intentionally buried, small, poisoned memories. Clara, weeping by the window, starting at the sound of a rider, a stranger in town, a man with flat eyes, who had watched their cabin from the ridge for 2 days before moving on. Elijah had gone out with his rifle, but the man was gone. When he returned, Clara was sick with fear. He'd dismissed it. He'd told her she was safe. He had been a fool. One morning, the wolf tracks drove him out early. They were closer this time, a bold semicircle around the barn. The pack was testing him. He spent hours resetting traps, reinforcing the chicken coop, his mind occupied with the physical threat. It was a relief. While he was gone, Mara searched. She did not ransack the cabin. Her movements were quiet, methodical. She was not looking for valuables. She was looking for Clara. She had a right to the life that had been kept from her. His reticence was a wall, and she would find the cracks. Under his bunk, pushed far against the wall, was a simple pine chest. It held his winter wools and a few tools. Beneath them, at the very bottom, was a small, carved wooden box. It was the one thing he had saved from his old life, something he'd had in his saddlebag on the day of the fire. She lifted the lid. It smelled of cedar and thyme. Inside lay a tintype of his parents, stern and unsmiling. There was a faded blue ribbon, and there were 2 photographs. The first was of him and Clara, taken by an itinerant photographer the year they were married. He looked stiff, younger, a man unused to happiness. Clara leaned against him, her smile small but real. Mara traced the outline of the woman's face. It was her mother, but it was not. This woman was soft, her eyes hopeful. Mara's own face was a mask carved from the same wood, but hardened by a different fire. She picked up the second photograph. It was only Clara. She was sitting in a chair, her hands folded over her lap. Her hair was different, softer. She was wearing a dress Mara did not recognize, and she was pregnant. Not just a hint, but the full, heavy swell of late pregnancy. Mara's breath caught. She stared at the image, her mind racing. The photograph was unlabeled. There was no date, no name. Who was this baby? Clara had met Elijah 10 years ago. Mara herself was 23. The math did not add up. It only subtracted. If this was her, then Clara had been pregnant long before she ever met Elijah. If this was not her, who was it? A child lost? A child taken? She was still holding the photograph when Elijah returned. His shoulders slumped with fatigue. He saw what was in her hand and he froze. For a moment, he looked like a man struck. He crossed the cabin in 2 strides and snatched the photograph from her, his movements rough. "You have no right."
"Who was the baby?"
Mara asked, her voice low, not retreating. "That is private," he bit out, his face a mask of old pain. "Was it me?" "No," he said, too quickly. "It was before. It was nothing. A hope we had, it didn't come to pass." He shoved the box back under the bunk, his hands shaking with a rage that was half aimed at her, and half at the memory itself. "You're lying," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "Get your coat," he snapped, turning away from her, unable to meet her dark, knowing eyes. "We're low on flour, and I need shot for those wolves. We're going to town." The ride to Deadwater was tense and silent. The settlement was little more than a muddy street carved between a dozen false-fronted buildings. A mercantile, 2 saloons, a smithy, and a land office. It was a place for trappers, miners, and ranchers to get drunk, get supplies, and get gone. Elijah Rourke's arrival was an event. He was their hermit, their local ghost story. When he tied his horse to the rail outside the mercantile, heads turned. When they saw Mara dismount, her rifle slung low on her back, the town went still. She walked behind him, her head high, feeling the weight of their stares. She had felt this before. The whispers, the pointed fingers, the assessment. She was the stranger, the outsider. Inside the mercantile, the air was thick with the smells of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and oiled canvas. Mrs. Finch, the proprietor, a woman whose face was a roadmap of other people's business, paused in her measuring of beans. "Mr. Rourke," she said, her voice tight with curiosity. "We weren't expecting to see you before the deep snow." Her eyes slid to Mara, cataloging her worn boots, her men's trousers, her sharp, exhausted face. "You have a visitor." "Flour," Elijah said, his voice flat. "Bacon, coffee, and 2 boxes of cartridges for the Winchester." As Mrs. Finch gathered the items, the whispers began. 2 women by the boat goods counter, their heads bent together. Mara heard the words clearly in the quiet room. "That's her." "Who?" "The stranger girl, the one staying at his place. Jeb Griggs was riding past and saw her. He says she claims to be Clara's—" "Clara? She's been dead 10 years. "That's what I said. But look at her. There's a cast to the eyes. It's unnatural." Mara's hands fisted. Elijah heard it too. His back went rigid. He paid in coin, his movements clipped, and took the heavy sacks. "Wait here," he ordered Mara. He crossed the street to the saloon. He needed whiskey, not for the cold, but for the raw, scraped feeling in his gut. The saloon was dim, the air sour with stale beer and wet wool. A few men were at the bar, and in the corner, playing cards, were Silas and Jeb Griggs. The Griggs brothers were a blight on the valley. They'd had a long-running, bitter dispute with Elijah's father over water rights, and the animosity had passed down like a rusted blade. Jeb, the younger one, saw Elijah and grinned, shoving his chair back. "Well, look here, Silas, the widower's come to town, and he ain't alone." Elijah ignored him, walking to the bar. "Whiskey." "Here you got a new housekeeper, Rourke," Jeb called out, his voice loud enough to carry, "though she looks more like a field hand." Elijah laid his coins on the bar, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. "Keep my name out of your mouth, Jeb." "Or what?" Silas chimed in, a heavier, slower man. "You'll go crying to your dead wife? Oh, wait, maybe she ain't dead. Maybe you just got a replacement." At the end of the bar, an old prospector named Huck, his face a ruin of sun and drink, squinted at the commotion. He was drunk, well past noon. "Clara," the old man slurred, pushing his empty glass forward. "I remember Clara. Pretty thing, sad eyes." "Shut up, old man," the bartender said. "Ain't no ghost," Huck mumbled, shaking his head. "I seen her. Sure did. Years after that fire. Must be 8 years ago, maybe 7. Down in Santa Fe. Saw her clear as day. She was working in a cantina. Called herself something else. Maria. No, something different. But it was her." The saloon went quiet. Elijah turned, his blood running cold, then hot. He crossed to the drunk and grabbed the front of his filthy shirt, lifting him half off his stool. The prospector's feet scuffled.
What did you say?
Elijah's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "Nothing," Huck squeaked, his eyes wide with terror. I was drunk. I'm drunk now. I don't remember nothing." "You're lying," Elijah growled. "He's just a drunk. Rourke," Silas Griggs said, standing up. "Let him be." Elijah looked from the terrified drunk to the grinning faces of the Griggs brothers. The confusion, the rage, the whispers, the letter. It all boiled over. He felt trapped. He shoved the old man back onto his stool with so much force it toppled, and stormed out of the saloon. Mara was standing by the horses, her face pale but composed. She had seen it all through the window. He didn't speak. He threw the supplies into his saddlebag, untied his horse, and mounted. "Let's go." The ride back was fast and brutal. He pushed his horse hard, and she kept up. They did not speak until the cabin door was shut behind them. The sacks dropped on the floor. Elijah paced the small space, a caged animal. "Lies," he said, his voice choked. "All of it. Whispers. Drunks. A forged letter." He rounded on her. You brought this. You come here and rake up her bones with your impossible stories." Mara didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her face hardening. "You think this is a story I wanted?" she shot back, her voice breaking with a fury that matched his. "You think I like being a ghost? I spent my entire life as a whisper." She tore her pack from her shoulder, her hands shaking. "You want to know my life? I'll tell you. We never stayed in one place for more than 6 months. Never. As soon as I made a friend. As soon as I learned the name of the streets. She'd wake me up in the middle of the night. 'It's time. Mara, pack your things. We're leaving.'" Tears of anger, not sorrow, welled in her eyes. "I never had a name that was my own. Sometimes I was Sarah, sometimes I was Jane. I grew up in rented rooms, in the backs of laundries, in cheap boarding houses. She never told me why. She never told me anything. She just ran." She sank onto the cot, her energy spent, the words pouring out of her, and she was always looking over her shoulder. Every time a man looked at her too long, every time a stranger asked a question, she would panic. She'd bolt the door. She'd make me hide in the wardrobe. She'd sit in the dark, just listening. Mara looked up, her gaze pinning him. One night, I asked her, I begged her, "Who are we running from?" And she grabbed me, her fingers digging into my arms. And she whispered, "Someone is hunting us, Mara, and if he finds us, he will kill us both." The cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Elijah stopped pacing. Her words hit him like a physical blow. "Someone is hunting us." It triggered the memory, the one he had buried, the one he had dismissed. It was just after they were married. Clara had woken him, screaming from a nightmare. She was trembling, slick with sweat. He'd held her, his strong, safe arms around her. "It was him," she'd wept. "He found me." "Who, Clara, who?" he had asked, smoothing her hair. "You're safe. It was just a dream." "No," she'd insisted, clinging to him. "A man I knew, from before. He said he'd never let me go. He said he'd find me, no matter where I ran." He had comforted her. He had told her she was Mrs. Rourke now, that no one would dare harm her here. He had dismissed it as a woman's fears, the shadows of a past that had no bearing on their new life. He had been so sure. Now, the guilt settled in, cold and heavy as lead. He hadn't listened. He hadn't protected her. He had offered platitudes when she was crying out with the truth. He had let her face that terror alone, and that terror had, in the end, burned their life to the ground. He looked at Mara, really looked at her, not as Clara's shadow, not as a liar, but as the living, breathing consequence of his failure. She was the child his wife had been running to protect. As if the confession had summoned it, the sky, which had been clear, turned. The wind picked up, howling down from the peaks. It was a sudden, violent change. Within an hour, a full blizzard was raging. Not snow, but stinging ice and wind that screamed like a banshee. Darkness fell, and the storm trapped them. The cabin, once his sanctuary, became their shared prison. The thunder was so loud it shook the very foundations of the cabin. It was a physical assault. With every crash, Mara flinched. The storm, combined with her raw, exposed emotions, was too much. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders beginning to shake. But it wasn't quiet weeping. It was a raw, angry breakdown. "Why?" she cried out, her voice muffled by her hands. "Why did she do it? Why leave me with you? Why not tell me the truth? She owed me that. She owed me a name." She slammed her fist on the small table. "She was a coward. She just ran and left me with all her questions." Elijah stood there, his own guilt a stone in his throat. He had no answers for her. He had only his own regret. He moved slowly, cautiously. He sat on the bench across from her. He was a man who had not offered comfort in 10 years. His hands were calloused. His words were rusty. He did not speak. He just sat there, a solid presence in the chaos of the storm. After a long moment, he reached out, his large, rough hand covering her small, fisted one on the table. She flinched at the touch, but she didn't pull away. He just held her hand, a silent, clumsy offering of shared pain. She finally looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion that he recognized. It was the exhaustion of a survivor. And in the flickering lamplight, her expression changed. The thunder crashed again, rattling the tin cups on the shelf. She was not looking at him as Clara's husband. She was not looking at him as her protector or her jailer. She was looking at him as the only other person in the world who understood the shape of the ghost that haunted them. She was looking at him as a man. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm and their breathing. His thumb moved, almost unconsciously, over the back of her hand. Her hand, in response, turned, her fingers lightly gripping his. He leaned forward. He saw the darkness of her eyes, the chapped skin of her lips, the pulse beating in her throat. He saw her, Mara, and a fierce, forbidden, and dangerous yearning ignited in the cold, dead pit of his stomach. It was a feeling he thought had died in the fire. She did not pull back. Her eyes fluttered, and she, too, leaned in. They were inches apart. The air was electric, thick with unspoken grief and a new, terrifying desire. He could smell the lye soap on her skin and the cold rain in her hair. He was about to kiss her. He pulled away. The movement was sharp, violent. He stood so quickly he almost knocked the bench over. He turned his back to her, gripping the edge of the hearth, his knuckles white. Shame washed over him, hot and suffocating. This was Clara's daughter. Or, if not, she was a young woman who had come to him for protection, for truth. And he, in his loneliness, in his confusion, had almost— "The storm sounds like it's letting up," he said, his voice a rough rasp. It was a lie. The wind was shrieking. He heard her take a slow, shaky breath. Mara said nothing. She did not speak of it. She pulled her hand back, wiping the last of her tears away with the back of her sleeve. She rose, gathered her blanket from the cot, and wrapped it around her shoulders, sitting by the fire, her back to him. The truce was broken. The old silence returned. But it was no longer empty. It was charged, dangerous, and filled with the knowledge of what had almost passed between them. The morning after the storm, the silence in the cabin was a physical weight. The air was frigid, the fire in the stove reduced to pale embers. Elijah had risen before the light, his movements stiff. The shame of the previous night, the near kiss, the raw desire he'd felt for this woman who was, or was not, Clara's daughter, sat in his stomach like a cold stone. He had betrayed his wife, his grief, and his guest, all in one terrible, weak moment. He was outside, splitting wood with a punishing rhythm, the axe biting deep with every swing. He was punishing the wood, but he was thinking of himself. The air was sharp, crystalline. The world was buried in 2 feet of fresh snow, bright and clean, a liar's sheet covering the rot beneath. Mara came out, pulling her coat tight. She did not carry her rifle. She just stood on the porch, watching him. He ignored her, the axe rising and falling. "You're going to break the handle," she said, her voice quiet. He stopped, the axe buried in the chopping block. He was breathing hard, steam pluming from his mouth. He would not look at her. "The wolves were back," he said, his voice flat. "Tracks by the barn. I have to reset the traps."
Elijah.
He flinched. She rarely used his name. "You have to tell me about the fire," she said. It was not a question. "I told you, it was a fire. It burned. It took her. That's the end of it." "No," Mara said, stepping off the porch into the deep snow. She walked toward him, her gaze unwavering. "You've been telling yourself that for 10 years, but you don't believe it. Not anymore. Not since I came." She stopped a few feet from him. "You argued, didn't you, before it happened?" He froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at her for the first time that morning. The light was harsh, catching the sharp planes of her face. She was not a ghost. She was solid, real, and she was seeing right through him. "What did you argue about?" she pressed, her voice soft but relentless. He leaned the axe against the block, his strength gone. He looked at his hands, then at the gray, unforgiving sky. "She was afraid." His voice was a rasp, unused to confession. "It was what I told you, what she'd said about that man, the one who wouldn't let her go. I dismissed it. I told her she was safe. I told her I was here." He let out a bitter, sharp laugh. "But that night, she brought it up again. She was frantic. She said he was close. She said she could feel him. She said we had to leave. Just pack and run. Abandon the homestead." He shook his head, the memory clawing at him. "I was proud. I was angry. I'd built this place with my own hands. I told her I would not be run off my own land by a shadow, by some phantom from her past." "She wasn't talking about a phantom," Mara whispered. "No," he said. "She wasn't, but I didn't see it. I got angry. I thought she was talking about me, that she was afraid of me, that she regretted coming here. I yelled. I told her I was a fool to think I could make her happy." He closed his eyes, the shame acute. "I told her if she wanted to run, she should go. And then I did. I left. I took my rifle and a bottle and I rode out. I told myself I was going to hunt the ridge, but I was just running, like a child." He turned to face her, his eyes hollow. "I rode for hours. I got drunk sitting on a rock up on the high ridge, feeling sorry for myself, and then I saw the smoke. It wasn't just a wisp. It was a column, black against the night sky. It was hours later. By the time I got back, it was gone. The whole cabin, just a roaring pile of embers. The guilt that had eaten him alive for 10 years was finally spoken. I wasn't there. She was screaming about a man, and I left her alone. I abandoned her. When she needed me, I was a mile away. Drunk, angry at my own pride, I killed her. Girl, whether I lit the match or not, I am the man who let her burn." Mara watched him, her expression unreadable. She did not offer comfort. She did not offer judgment. She just absorbed his truth. "Take me there," she said. "What?" "To the old cabin, to the ashes. I want to see it." "There's nothing to see. It's buried. In snow. In time." "Take me." He nodded, too weary to argue. They saddled the horses. The ride was short, less than half a mile. Down into the creek bottom where the land was flatter, more sheltered by cottonwoods. He had not built there again. The place felt cursed. It was, as he said, the snow was a deep, untouched blanket. Only the very top of the chimney stack, a few blackened stones, poked through the white. It was quiet, peaceful. The branches of the trees were heavy with ice. Elijah stayed on his horse, his hands gripping the saddle horn. He could not go closer. This was his monument to failure. Mara dismounted. She waded through the snow, her boots sinking deep. She stood in what would have been the center of the small cabin, her cabin, the house she might have known. She looked around, her eyes tracing the faint, rectangular depression in the snow. She was not there to mourn. She was there to investigate. She kicked at the snow with the toe of her boot. She crouched down, her gloved hands digging. She was searching. "Mara, there is nothing," Elijah said, his voice strained. She ignored him. Her fingers brushed something hard. She pulled, digging at the frozen earth and ice. She worked at it for a long minute, her breath clouding, until she pulled it free. It was a lump of blackened, melted metal. She rubbed the soot and ice away with her thumb. It was silver, or had been, a locket, round, its edges fused together by a heat so intense it had warped the shape. But it was unmistakably the locket, the one he had found the clasp for. She held it up. "She didn't take it with her." Elijah stared. If Clara had run, why leave this? Unless she had no time, unless the man she feared had come. "The sheriff," Elijah said, the words coming to him sudden and clear. "The one who investigated. He lived here. He's retired now." "Did he investigate?" Mara asked, her voice cold as the metal in her hand. "Amos Hatcher. He lives up Bear Canyon. He's the one who wrote the report. He's the one who said it was an accident. Let's go see Mr. Hatcher." Amos Hatcher was an old man, his back bent, his face a web of deep lines. He lived in a small, tidy cabin that smelled of wood smoke and chicory. He was surprised to see Elijah Rourke, and deeply wary of the dark-eyed woman at his side. "Rourke," he said, leaning on his axe. Thought you'd have been snowed in for the winter by now." "We need to talk. Amos," Elijah said, dismounting. "About what? I'm done with town business. Been done for 8 years. "About the fire at my place," Elijah said. 10 years ago. Hatcher's wary look turned to one of sour defensiveness. "What about it? Sad business? Tragic? Case was closed a decade back." Mara stepped forward, holding out her palm. The melted locket sat in her glove. "You missed this." Hatcher squinted at it. That's Clara's. Her mother's. I think she said, I found the clasp. Figured the rest. Well, it burned." "You didn't look very hard," Mara said. "Now, listen, Missy." "She was seen," Elijah interrupted, his voice low and hard. "A man in Deadwater saw her, years after the fire, down in Santa Fe." "Drunks see all sorts of things," Hatcher scoffed. But his eyes darted. "And I am her daughter," Mara said. Hatcher froze. He looked from Mara to Elijah and back again. The color drained from his face. He looked, suddenly, like a very old, very guilty man. He sighed, the sound a whistle in the cold air. "You best come inside." He poured them coffee, his hands shaking. He sat at his small table and stared into his cup. "I was new on the job," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Hadn't been sheriff more than a month. The fire, it was bad. Hottest I'd ever seen. Burned right to the foundations." "What happened?" Amos, Elijah demanded. I was paid off. Elijah's hand clenched.
You… what?
Not by you, Hatcher said quickly.
By him, 2 days after the fire, before you'd even come back down from the ridge.
A man rode into town. Not from here. Wore a city suit. Boots polished. Had 2 men with him. Hard cases. He came to my office. Hatcher swallowed. He said he represented the wife's family. Back east. Said she was a troubled woman. Had debts. He said the fire was a tragedy, but that it was also an opportunity to settle her affairs, to close the books.
What did he want?
Mara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He wanted me to close the case. He wanted her declared dead. Officially. He paid me $500, just to write the report. To say the body was consumed. To make her name disappear. $500. It was a fortune. I took it, Hatcher whispered, ashamed. I was poor. I had a family. I told myself she'd just run off, that Rourke probably knew it. I figured it was just some family squabble. I never thought… His name, Elijah said, his voice a low growl. The man who paid you. He never gave it. He was formal, cold, but I heard one of his men, just once. He called him Kane, Marshal Kane. The name fell into the small cabin. It meant nothing to Elijah, but it landed on Mara like a physical blow. She went pale, her hand instinctively going to the locket in her pocket. They rode back to Deadwater in a blizzard of shared, unspoken thoughts. The snow had started again, thick and heavy. They needed supplies, but more than that, they needed a moment to comprehend. A man named Kane, a payoff, a 10-year-old conspiracy. They were tying their horses outside the mercantile when the trouble found them. Well, look-a here, Silas. The hermit brought his ghost to town again. Jeb Griggs and his brother, Silas, stepped out of the saloon. They were drunk, their faces flushed, their eyes mean. The rumors had festered in their small minds, watered with whiskey. Elijah grabbed the sack of flour. Mara, get the coffee. We're leaving. But Silas, the bigger of the two, stepped in front of Mara, blocking her way to the door. He loomed over her, grinning. What's the matter, girlie? He slurred, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the snow near her feet. You the one digging up graves? Or you the one that crawled out of one? Leave her alone, Elijah said. His voice was quiet, but it had a new edge, an edge Hatcher's confession had honed. We don't like liars in this valley, Jeb chimed in, circling around. And we don't much like whores who pretend to be dead women. She ain't pretending, Silas sneered. She's just a liar's daughter. Mara's hand dropped to the knife at her belt, but Elijah moved first. He didn't speak. He didn't warn. The years of pent-up grief, the white-hot rage from Hatcher's betrayal, the guilt of his own abandonment, and the fierce, terrible, protective wave he felt for the woman standing behind him. It all coalesced. He dropped the flour sack and hit Silas in the jaw. It was not a barroom swing. It was a straight, vicious punch, all his weight behind it. The sound was a wet, heavy crack. Silas went down like a felled tree, his head hitting the boardwalk with a thud. He lay there, stunned, spitting blood and a broken tooth into the muddy snow. Jeb, shocked, fumbled for his pistol. Elijah was already on him. He grabbed Jeb's wrist, twisting it until the man cried out. He shoved him backward against the wall of the mercantile. His forearm pressed against Jeb's throat. You! Elijah snarled, his face inches from the terrified drunk. The hermit was gone. The man who stood there was someone the town had never seen. You will never speak her name again. You will never look at her again. You will not come within 100 yards of my land, or I will finish what our fathers started. Am I clear? Jeb, choking, nodded frantically. Elijah shoved him away. Jeb stumbled, gathered his groaning brother, and the two of them disappeared back into the saloon. The street was dead silent. Mrs. Finch was watching from the mercantile window, her hand over her mouth. Elijah picked up the sack of flour. He looked at Mara. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He was breathing heavily. Mara looked at him. She looked at the blood in the snow. She looked at his bleeding hand. She had seen violence all her life. She had seen cruelty and fear, but she had never had anyone stand in front of her like that. As they mounted their horses and rode out of the silent town, a small, slow smile touched the corner of her mouth. It was a grim, satisfied, dangerous smile. It said more than any words of thanks ever could. The ride back was silent, the snow falling thick around them, muffling the world. When they got to the cabin, the adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving them both raw and exposed. Elijah built up the fire, his back to her. He was shaking. The violence, after 10 years of peace, had undone him. Mara came to him. She didn't speak. She took his injured hand. His knuckles were swelling, the cut smeared with dirt and blood. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. Her voice was low. "He called you," Elijah began, his voice thick. "I've been called worse." She pushed him onto the bench and went for the carbolic and the clean linen. She came back and began to clean his wounds. Her touch was firm, professional, but it was not impersonal. Not anymore. He watched her, the firelight playing on her dark hair, her focused expression. "When you look at me," he whispered, "what do you see? The man who left her to die?" She paused, dabbing at a cut. "I see the man who punched Silas Griggs." He let out a shaky breath. "It's not right. What I feel, this darkness, what I felt in the storm, it's a betrayal." He was talking to himself more than to her. "She was Clara. You are her daughter." Mara finished wrapping the bandage. She tied it off, but she did not let go of his hand. She held it, her small, calloused fingers resting on his. She looked up, her dark eyes locking with his. "You think I'm a ghost," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Or her shadow. You keep looking for her in my face, but she's gone. Elijah." She stood up, pulling him to his feet. She did not release his hand. She stepped closer, placing her free hand on his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the warmth of her palm, even through his shirt. "I'm not," she said. "I'm flesh. I'm here." He broke. The word, flesh, the feel of her hand, the truth in her eyes, it shattered the last of his defenses. He was not betraying a ghost. He was honoring the living. He grabbed her, his uninjured hand tangling in her hair, pulling her face to his. The kiss was not the clumsy, hesitant near miss of the storm. This was desperate. It was a decade of starvation. It was all his guilt, his loneliness, his rage, and his sudden, terrifying hope. It was hungry, and it was rough. She met him. She did not yield. She participated. Her arms went around his neck, her fingers digging into his shoulders. She kissed him back with the same raw, desperate need. She had been running her entire life, a phantom herself. This was an anchor. This was real. The kiss was a slow burn, a deep, aching discovery in the midst of their shared wreckage. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Mara," he whispered, the name a prayer and a curse. "Don't talk," she breathed. "Don't say anything. Just be here." He lifted her. She was light in his arms. He carried her the few steps to the thick bearskin rug in front of the hearth, laying her down in the warm glow of the fire. They made love. It was silent, save for the crackle of the flames and the howl of the wind outside. There were no words of love, no promises. It was an act of profound, aching necessity. It was almost reverent in its honesty. Two haunted people clinging to the one solid thing in a world of ghosts and lies. Afterward, they lay tangled in her blanket, the fire burning down to glowing coals. The cabin was quiet. And in that quiet, the dam of Elijah's grief.
The one he had meticulously maintained for 10 years, 1 month, and 20-odd days, finally broke. He wept. He turned his face into her shoulder, and his body was racked with silent, terrible sobs. He wept for Clara, the woman he had loved and failed. He wept for the 10 years he had wasted, honoring a lie. He wept for the shame and the relief of the act they had just committed. Mara did not stiffen. She did not offer empty comfort. She simply held him. She ran her fingers through his hair, her own face etched in a sorrow that matched his. She held him as he shuddered, letting him pour out the decade of poison. When the last of the sobs quieted, and he lay spent against her, she whispered into the darkness, "You're not the only one who lost her." The new day arrived with a brutal, piercing light. The sun hit the endless snow and shattered, filling the cabin with a cold glare that exposed every speck of dust, every shadow. Elijah was awake before the first hint of gray, his body stiff. He had not slept. He had lain on his bunk, listening to the sound of Mara's breathing, the scent of her skin, the memory of their bodies tangled by the fire, and he was consumed by a profound, chilling shame. He had broken his 10-year vigil. He had betrayed the memory of his wife with her own daughter. The grief he had carried like a shield was gone, replaced by the sordid reality of a base, human need. He felt unclean. He moved with a brute, silent force, stoking the fire, his movements jerky. He pulled on his boots and coat and went out into the biting air to feed the horses. The world was frozen, silent. He wanted to pretend last night was an aberration, a symptom of the storm, a moment of shared madness that the cold light of day could erase. When he returned, she was awake. She was not on the cot. She was standing by the hearth, dressed, her hair combed. She was watching him, her gaze clear, steady, and entirely without shame. She held a mug of coffee out to him. He ignored it, stalking past her to check the ammo in his rifle. "The snow's deep, but it's light," he said, his voice a rasp. "We should check the traps, and the Griggs brothers, they might be stupid enough to ride out." "Elijah," her voice cut through his desperate attempt at normalcy. He stopped, his back to her. "Look at me." He turned, slowly, reluctantly. He could not meet her eyes. "It happened," she said, not an accusation, not a celebration, a fact, as simple and solid as the table between them. "It was a mistake," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "It was the fight, the storm. It was grief." She walked toward him, stopping until she was close enough to see the conflict in his eyes. It was not a mistake, and it was not grief. She was resolute. "I am tired of being a ghost. I am tired of being someone's secret, someone's fear, someone's memory. I was there. You were there." She looked down at his bandaged hand, the one she had tended. "You can hide from the past. You can hide from the Griggs brothers. You can hide from the memory of Clara." She looked up, her gaze pinning him. "But I won't be a memory you hide from." He saw in her face not the echo of her mother, but the iron will of a woman who had survived everything. She was right. He could not pretend. The act had bound them in a new, terrifying, and undeniable way. It had sealed their pact. "Kane," he said, the name heavy. "Marshall Kane, the man who paid Hatcher." "He's the one," she said, her voice dropping. "He's the reason she ran. He's the reason I exist." "Denver," Elijah said, the decision forming. "The infirmary. You said she died in Denver. That's where the trail begins again." He finally took the mug from her hand. Their fingers brushed. The jolt was real. He did not pull away. "We leave in 1 hour." The journey to Denver was long, brutal, and changed. It was hundreds of miles south, across a landscape that was hardening into the deep freeze of winter. They sold his milk cow and one of the geldings in Deadwater for supplies and 2 hardier mountain horses, taking only what they could carry. They rode hard, speaking little, but the silence between them was no longer empty.
They were a unit when they made camp in the lee of a rocky outcrop. He took the first watch, his rifle across his knees, not just listening for wolves, but for riders. She would wake him for her turn, her hand on his shoulder, a silent, necessary touch. They shared meals, their hands meeting as they passed the coffee pot, their eyes meeting over the small, sputtering fire. He watched her. He saw the way she rode, slumped with exhaustion but never complaining. He saw the way she cared for her horse, her movements efficient and gentle. He saw the grim set of her jaw as they rode south, closer to the source of her pain. The shame had not evaporated, but it was being burned away by something else, a fierce, protective drive. He was no longer just guarding Clara's daughter. He was guarding Mara. Denver was a shock. After the vast, empty silence of the territory, the city was a roaring, muddy assault. It was a sprawling camp of brick and timber, choked with the smoke of coal, the stink of tanneries, and the noise of 10,000 people scrabbling for a living. Teamsters shouted, wagons clogged the streets, and men in suits pushed past men in rags. Elijah was a man of the mountains, and the city made his skin crawl. He felt exposed, his rifle an awkward burden. Mara, however, navigated the streets with a grim familiarity. This was the world she had grown up in. This was the world that had killed her mother. They found the infirmary. It was a low, clapboard building in a poor part of town, smelling of bleach, boiled laundry, and sickness. A tired woman in a gray, stained apron sat at a front desk, a ledger open before her. She was Nurse Evans. "We're looking for a woman who died here," Mara said, her voice low. "About 3 months ago. Her name was Clara Rourke." The nurse adjusted her spectacles, her finger running down the page of the ledger. No Rourke. Not in August, not in September. We had a Carson, a Riley. No Rourke." "She was in her 40s, Mara pressed, her voice urgent. "Dark hair, going gray, a cough, a bad one. From the lungs." The nurse paused, her fingers stopping. She looked up, her eyes softening with recognition. "Ah, you mean Catherine? Catherine Miller. In room 5. She looked at Mara, then at Elijah, a tall, grim man who looked like he could wrestle a bear. "You're the daughter?" Mara nodded, her throat tight. "I'm sorry, child. She's gone. September the 4th. It was pneumonia. Her lungs just gave out. She worked at the steam laundry, you know, the bleach and the damp. It gets them all, in the end." "Did she—" Mara struggled. "Did she speak at the end?" The nurse nodded, her expression full of a weary pity. "They all do. They talk to the ones who ain't there." She came around the desk, a kindness in her gesture. "She was a sad one. Your mother kept to herself. But the last few days, she was frail, just broken. I'd sit with her when I could. She knew the end was coming." She led them to a small, empty room. It was just a cot, a chair, and a window that looked out on a brick wall. "She was here," the nurse said. "She'd hold my hand. She was confused. She kept whispering the same thing over and over. He didn't mean to. He didn't mean to." Elijah's gut clenched. He leaned against the doorframe, the guilt washing over him. "She meant me. She was forgiving me for leaving. I thought she was talking about a husband. Maybe," the nurse continued, "or God. And she was scared. Not of dying, of being found. She made me promise that if a man came asking for her, a specific man, I was to say I'd never seen her." "What man?" Elijah asked, his voice thick. "A man with a powerful name, a rich man," she said. She held onto my hand, her eyes so wide. "He'll find me. He'll know." She said his name, Marshall Kane. The name hung in the sterile air. "And you," the nurse said, looking at Mara. "She was waiting for you. She had that letter. She told me.
My girl is coming. I have to give this to my girl. She has to know. She has to be safe." The nurse's eyes welled. "When you came, the day before she passed, she gave you the letter, and after you left, she just let go. It was like she was done. She died in her sleep, peaceful, at the last." They left the infirmary, walking blindly, the noise of the city a dull roar. Elijah was devastated. He was hollowed out. It was all true. Clara had lived for 10 years, alone, in fear. She had died in a charity ward, whispering his name, forgiving him. "She didn't mean to," Elijah repeated, his voice breaking. He stopped in the middle of the crowded boardwalk, grabbing Mara's arm. "She meant me, for leaving her that night, for my pride. She was forgiving me." Mara stopped. She looked at his anguished face. The noise, the people, it all faded away. She shook her head, her expression one of profound, old sorrow. "No, Elijah," she said, her voice flat. "She wasn't talking about you." "What? What do you mean? She said—" "You don't understand," Mara said, the last of her walls crumbling. "You still think this story is about you. You think her life was about you. It wasn't." "Mara, what are you talking about?" "Marshall Kane," she said, her voice hardening. "The man who paid Hatcher. The man she was afraid of." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "He's my father." Elijah stared at her. The world tilted. "What? But you're 23. The math, the dates. It made no sense. "Clara and we were married 10 years ago." "She knew him long before you," Mara said, her voice raw, pulling him into the shadow of an alley, away from the prying eyes. "She was his, that's what he called her. She wasn't his wife. She was his, property. He was a rich man in St. Louis, powerful, respected, and in his house, he was a monster." Elijah's mind was reeling. The photograph, the pregnant Clara. It wasn't a lost hope. It was Mara. "She told me I was born in a room with a locked door," Mara whispered, her eyes dark with borrowed memories. "He was her captor. For years, he beat her. He hurt her. He told her she would never leave, that he owned her. He owned me." Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were dry. "He beat me, too, when I was old enough to be a nuisance. He starved me to keep her in line. He was a devil." Elijah felt sick. "One night," Mara continued, "when I was about 12, maybe 13, he made a mistake. A servant left a door unlocked. Clara woke me. She just said, 'Now.' We ran. We ran with nothing but the clothes on our backs. We ran for a year. We changed our names. We worked, cleaning, sewing. We were always looking over our shoulders." "And then," she said, "she met you. She thought Montana was the end of the earth. She thought he would never find her here. She thought you were a good man, that you could keep her safe." Elijah's devastation was complete. It was a shattering. His entire life, his entire grief, reformed itself around this new, horrific truth. "So," he said, his voice barely audible, "the night of the fire, the man she was afraid of, it was him, he'd found her." "Yes," Mara said, "he found her, and you were angry, you didn't listen, you left, and he came." "He set the fire," Elijah stated. It was not a question. "He set it to kill her, to kill you both, to wipe her off the earth because he couldn't have her. But she fled. She ran from the fire," Mara said. "She had to, and she let everyone believe she was dead. She let you believe it. She let him believe it. It was the only way he would finally stop hunting her, the only way she could keep me safe. She came and found me. I was hidden in a mission school in Bozeman, and we ran again, to Denver, and we never stopped running. Not until she died. Elijah leaned against the brick wall, the cold seeping into his back. He had not just failed her. He had been a fool. His pride, his anger. He had walked out and left her to face the monster she had spent her life fleeing. And the line? He didn't mean to. It wasn't about his abandonment. It was about Cain. What had he done? When she said, "He didn't mean to," Mara said, her voice hollow. She was remembering him, my father. I think she was just a broken woman, trying to find a reason, trying to believe her captor, her tormentor. Maybe he didn't mean to be the devil he was. She was trying to forgive him, just so she could die. He had no words. He saw the last 10 years of his life as a monument to his own ignorance. Clara hadn't been a fragile woman afraid of shadows. She had been a warrior, a survivor, and he had failed her in the final battle. He looked at Mara, at the daughter of this monster, the child of this pain. She was the living proof of it all. "We're going back," he said, his voice a low growl. "We're going home." The ride back to Montana was not like the journey down. The shared grief was gone, replaced by a cold, hard, shared purpose. The man who had destroyed Clara's life, who had poisoned Mara's, and who had stolen Elijah's past, was still out there. Elijah was a different man. The weight of his guilt had been transformed into a cold, dense rage. His focus was singular. He was no longer just protecting a guest. He was protecting the last living piece of the woman he had loved. He was protecting Mara. They pushed the horses hard, racing the coming winter, the dread of what they would find growing with every mile. They reached the homestead in the blue light of a frozen dusk. The air was deathly still, too still. "Stay here," Elijah said, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "No," Mara said, drawing her own. He didn't argue. They approached the cabin from the trees. On foot. There were tracks in the snow, not just their own. Horses, at least 4 or 5. They were fresh. The cabin was dark, but the barn door was open, a faint line of lantern light spilling onto the snow. Elijah glanced at Mara. He pointed to the side of the barn. She nodded, moving like a shadow. He took the front. He kicked the door open, his rifle up, ready. The Griggs brothers were there. Silas, his jaw still swollen, and Jeb. They were sitting on hay bales, drinking his whiskey. They scrambled for their guns, but they were too slow, too drunk. "Drop them," Elijah commanded. "Now, Rourke, just hold on," Jeb stammered, his hands half raised. We're just waiting." "Waiting for who?" A slow clapping sound came from the shadows of the stalls. "Very good, Mr. Rourke. Very good, indeed." A man stepped out into the light. He was not a homesteader. He was in his 50s, wearing a fine wool coat and polished boots. He was handsome, his hair silver at the temples, his face unlined, save for the cold, flat emptiness of his eyes. He looked past Elijah, his gaze landing on Mara, who had just entered, her rifle leveled. The man smiled. It did not touch his eyes. "Catherine," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "You are the living image of her. A little harder, perhaps, but you have your mother's eyes." It was Marshal Cain. "We was just keeping 'em here for you, Mr. Cain," Silas mumbled. "And you've done your job, gentlemen," Cain said, dismissing them. He never took his eyes off Mara. "You can go." The Griggs brothers scrambled out of the barn. "She's not Catherine," Elijah growled, moving to stand between Mara and the man. "And she's not your concern." "She is my blood," Cain said, as if stating a simple fact. "And you are the man who sheltered my property. I came here 10 years ago to collect what was mine. I was thorough. I set a fire. I was told she was inside. But Clara was always resourceful, and it seems so is her offspring." He looked at Mara. "You have something of mine. A letter. I'm told, confession. I have nothing of yours, Mara spat.
This land, Cain said, gesturing around the barn, is now legally mine. Your wife's debts were considerable. I had them transferred. When she died in that fire, I made a claim, but the title was contested by her husband. You, he smiled. Now that you've returned, you've complicated my tidy legal arrangement. And you, he said to Mara, are a witness I cannot abide. He had come to finish it, to wipe the last traces of Clara and her child from the earth. Elijah raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. You won't touch her. Cain sighed, as if bored. I'm not here to negotiate. Mr. Rourke, I am here to conclude. The Griggs brothers are not alone. My men are on the ridge. You are outnumbered. Give me the girl and the letter, and I will let you live. Elijah looked at Mara. He saw her terror, but beneath it, the iron will. She would not run, not again. He turned his gaze back to Cain, the man who had taken everything, the man who now threatened the only thing he had left. No, Elijah said, his voice flat and cold as the steel in his hand. You have taken enough. He stepped fully in front of Mara, shielding her body with his. You want her, you come through me. I will protect her, no matter the cost. Cain's civilized mask did not crack. He simply inclined his head, a gesture of polite disappointment, as if Elijah had refused a second cup of tea. A pity, he said. That was the only signal. The night exploded. A muzzle flash from the ridge, high and to the right. The sound cracked a half-second later, the bullet splintering the barn door frame where Elijah's head had been. A second shot came from the trees near the cabin. They were surrounded. The horses! Elijah roared. Shoving Mara toward the stalls, he swung his rifle toward Cain, but the man was already moving, dissolving back into the darkness. Another bullet sang through the open barn door, thudding into a sack of feed. They're in the corral, Mara yelled back. No time! The side door! Go! He fired twice into the darkness where Cain had been, providing cover. Mara bolted for the small side door used for mucking. As she reached it, Jeb Griggs, who had only pretended to flee, stepped around the corner of the barn, his pistol raised. He was grinning, his broken teeth black in the gloom. Going somewhere, ghost, he slurred. He fired. Mara dove, hitting the snowy ground, her rifle sliding from her grasp. Elijah saw it. He saw her fall. A white-hot, primitive rage, purer than any grief, erased the world. He turned, lined up his sights on the shadow of Jeb Griggs, and pulled the trigger. The force of the Winchester shot hit Jeb square in the chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the barn wall. He made no sound. He just slid down into the snow, his pistol dropping from a lifeless hand. Elijah ran toward Mara. Are you hit? No, she gasped, scrambling for her rifle. He missed. Another shot kicked up snow at Elijah's feet. He felt a sudden, sharp impact, a searing burn in his left side, just above the hip. It felt like being kicked by a mule. He grunted, stumbling, but the rage held him up. Go! To the cabin! Get the bags! Silas! A voice roared from the darkness. It was Cain, his voice no longer smooth, but ragged with fury. He killed the boy! Kill them! Silas Griggs burst from behind the water trough, his face a mask of grief and madness, firing his shotgun wildly. Pellets tore through the air, ripping holes in the barnwood. Elijah grabbed Mara, pulling her behind the corner. Move! Now! Mara! He pushed her toward the cabin, firing his rifle back at Silas, driving him to cover. They ran. The 30 yards of open ground between the barn and the cabin felt like 1,000 miles. Bullets snapped at their heels. The men on the ridge were firing, but in the dark, their aim was poor. They slammed into the cabin, Elijah barring the door. Mara was already grabbing her pack and the saddlebags he'd left by the door, the ones packed for Denver,
He hit you, she said, her voice tight, seeing the dark stain spreading on his shirt.
It's nothing, he lied, gasping. Window, watch the barn.
He went to the back window, peering out. The moon was rising, illuminating the snow, turning their world into a deadly landscape of black and white.
They're moving, he said.
3 of them, circling south. Silas is still by the barn. Kane. There, Mara pointed. Marshal Kane was moving from the trees, his fine coat gone, using the shadows of the woodpile to advance. He was directing his men. He was methodical. He was not a barroom brawler. He was a hunter. He's trying to pin us. He'll set the house on fire, Elijah said. The words tore at him. History. No, Mara said. She raised her rifle, resting it on the window ledge. She took a slow, steady breath. She did not look like Clara. She looked like something new, something forged in the cold. She waited. Kane stepped from behind the woodpile, gesturing to one of his men. He was exposed for 1 second. Mara fired. The shot was clean. Kane cried out, a sharp, animal sound of shock and pain. He grabbed his shoulder, stumbling back, disappearing into the darkness. You hit him, Elijah whispered, a grim satisfaction in his voice.
Silas,
Kane roared, his voice thick with pain.
Burn it! Burn them out!
They heard Silas yelling, a desperate, hateful sound. They heard him splashing kerosene from the barn lamp onto the porch. The back way, Elijah said. We can't stay. He'll box us in. He grabbed his rifle, the pain in his side a low, insistent throb. He unbarred the back door, the one that faced the mountain slope. Go, straight up the ridge. Don't stop. He kicked the door open. A shot immediately rang out from the trees. One of Kane's men was already there. Elijah fired back, emptying his rifle toward the muzzle flash. Run, Mara, run! She ran. He followed, reloading as he moved, stumbling in the deep snow. The man in the trees kept firing, but they were a moving target, climbing into the dark, thick pine forest. Behind them, they heard a whoosh as the porch of the cabin caught fire, the flames leaping up, painting the snow a terrible, dancing orange. They did not look back. They plunged into the wilderness, Elijah's blood leaving a dark, intermittent trail in the snow. They climbed for an hour, the firelight fading below them, the shouts of Kane's men growing distant. The cold was their ally. It bit at their lungs, but it also masked their trail. The pain in Elijah's side had turned from a hot sear to a deep, agonizing ache. He was slowing, his steps heavy. Keep going, Mara urged, pulling at his arm. I know the place, he gasped. An old mining cabin, up high. No one's used it in 20 years. He was leaning on her now, his weight heavy. The man who had been a rock of solitude was now dependent, bleeding, his strength failing. She took it. She put her shoulder under his, took his rifle, and half dragged him up the steep, snow-choked incline. They found it near 2 a.m. It was little more than a hovel. 4 stone walls built against the side of the mountain, a crude fireplace, and a roof of sod and pine logs. But it was shelter. It was defensible. Mara helped him inside, easing him down onto the packed dirt floor. The place was freezing, smelling of dust, rock, and animal nests. But the door was thick wood, and the chimney, though crumbling, was sound. The horses, he whispered, his teeth chattering. They'll be gone. He'll take them, or the fire will set them loose. She was all business, her voice stripped of fear. She found a stash of dry wood left by some long-gone prospector, stacked in a dry corner. She used her flint and steel, her hands shaking from cold and exertion, and brought a small, sputtering fire to life. In the growing light, she saw how bad he was. He was pale, his skin clammy. She tore open his shirt. The bullet had gone in the left side, high, missing his gut, but it had torn through muscle. It looked like it had passed clean through, but he had lost a lot of blood. "It's cold," he mumbled, shivering. "I know. The fire will warm us." She packed the wound, front and back, with the cleanest strips of linen she had, pressing hard to stanch the bleeding. He cried out, a low groan, but he did not fight her. She barred the heavy door, and then, as if on cue, the wind picked up. The low moan it had held all night turned into a high-pitched scream. Snow began to fall. Not a gentle dusting, but a thick, driving curtain of white. Within an hour, a full blizzard was raging, the kind that could bury a man in 10 minutes. Mara sat back on her heels, the firelight catching the exhaustion in her face. They were trapped. The fire below was gone. The homestead lost. Cain was out there, wounded, but his men were with him, and the snow, the same snow that had trapped them in the new cabin, was now trapping them in this ruin. History repeating, but this time they were on the same side. They found solace in the eye of the storm. The little cabin, a tomb for one, became a fortress for two. The wind howled, erasing their tracks, erasing the world. Cain could not find them now. They were safe, for the moment. Mara sat beside him, feeding the fire, her rifle across her lap. Elijah drifted in and out of a painful consciousness. His shivering stopped as the cabin warmed. "You hit him," he murmured, his eyes closed. "You shot your father." "He is not my father," she said to the flames. "He is just a man, a bad man." He opened his eyes. The fever was starting, but his gaze was clear. He looked at her, not at the woman tending his wound, but at the woman who had fought beside him, the woman who had run into the darkness, and then turned and fired. "When I saw Jeb, when I saw him aim at you," he whispered, his voice thick. It wasn't about Clara. It wasn't about the past. It was just, you." She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the fire. "All my life," he said, his voice stronger, "I've been honoring a ghost, living in a grave I dug for myself. I thought, what we did, it was a betrayal of her." He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her face. His calloused fingers were rough against her skin. "It wasn't. It was the first true thing I've done in 10 years. The love that had flickered between them, born of grief and desperation, now burned clean. It was no longer forbidden. It was not a shadow of another, older love. It was raw, defiant, and as necessary as the fire that kept them from freezing. It was the only thing that made sense in a world of lies and violence. "I don't want the past, Mara," he said, his voice urgent. "I don't want to live there anymore. I want you. Not because you are her daughter. I want you because you are my future. If we live through this." Her own life, a life of running, of being a secret, of being invisible, finally came into focus. She had been a tool of her mother's fear, a ghost hunted by her father's cruelty. This man, this broken, grieving man, was the first person to see her. "When I was running," she whispered, her hand covering his, "my whole life, I never felt real. I was just her daughter, his victim." She leaned closer, her breath misting in the cold air. "When I stood at that window, when I fired, I felt alive. For the first time." He pulled her down. His kiss was clumsy, chapped, and tasted of blood and smoke. But it was not the kiss of grief. It was a kiss of need, a desperate, affirming desire. They made love again. It was not the reverent, aching silence of the first time. This was fierce, acclaiming. It was two survivors, stripped of everything, finding their one true thing in the heart of a blizzard. It was an act of defiance against the cold, against the past, and against the man who would see them both dead. It was not about what they had lost. It was about what they refused to surrender. Days passed. The blizzard raged for 2 days, then 3, burying them in a white, silent world. Elijah's fever broke, but the wound was angry, the edges inflamed. "It needs to be stitched," Mara said on the 4th day. The light in the cabin was thin. The snow piled halfway up the single, small window. "There's a needle in my pack, a sail needle," he said, his voice weak. She found it, and a spool of linen thread. She boiled the needle and thread in their small tin pot over the fire. He was sitting up against the wall, pale, his jaw set. "This will hurt," she said. "More than the bullet?" he asked, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe." She stitched the wound. Her hands were steady. She worked with a grim focus, her stitches small and neat. He did not make a sound, but his hand gripped his knee, his knuckles white. The intimacy of the act was profound. She was mending him, her touch both clinical and loving. When she was done, she bandaged it with the last of their clean linen. He was sweating, but his eyes were clear. "You'd make a good field doctor," he said. "I've stitched canvas," she replied. "It's not so different." His strength returned, but slowly. The cabin was their world. The snow was a prison, but it was also a respite. They had little food, half a sack of flour from his pack, salt and coffee. He taught her. He was too weak to move far, but he could speak. He sat by the fire, his voice low, and taught her the things he knew. He showed her how to make a snare from a bit of wire she'd found, how to tell by the grayness of the light what new weather was coming, how to bank the fire with ash so it would smolder for 8 hours, saving precious fuel. He was giving her his knowledge. He was giving her the tools of survival, and she, a woman of back alleys and laundry rooms, absorbed it. She was a quick study. She set the snares near the cabin, and on the 2nd day, caught a rabbit. They ate, the meat stringy but hot, and they felt their strength return. On the 7th day, the sun came out. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The silence was absolute. Mara stood at the small window, looking out at the mountains. The snow drifted 10 feet deep against the cabin. They were safe. For now. But the rabbit snares would not last, and the cold was a patient enemy. "He thinks we're dead," Elijah said from his place by the fire. "Or trapped. He'll wait. Cain is a patient man. When the thaw comes, he'll be back, or he'll have Silas Griggs watch the valley." Mara turned from the window. Her face, which had been worn and haunted, was now set with a hard, new resolve. The fear was gone. "She ran," Mara said, her voice clear. "My mother. She ran her entire life. She ran from him. She ran from the fire. She ran from you. She ran until she died in that little room." She walked to the fire and sat across from him. She picked up her rifle, checking the action. Her movements sure. "He wins if we stay here and starve. He wins if we run. I am tired of running." She looked up, her dark eyes boring into his. "I will not live hiding again." Elijah watched her. He saw the woman she had become. She was not Clara. She was not Cain's victim. She was Mara. "What do we do?" he asked. "We go back," she said. "When you're strong enough, we go back to Deadwater. We get Hatcher. We get the letter. We get my mother's journal. She kept one. I know it. It's why he wanted the letter. It's evidence." "He'll kill us," Elijah said, not as a protest, but as a statement of fact. "He will try," Mara corrected him. "But we are not like him. We are not murderers. We are not hiding. We are going to expose the truth about Clara. We are going to face him. Together." He saw the plan, desperate and dangerous. But it was better than hiding. It was better than waiting for the end. He nodded, slowly. The hermit of Deadwater Creek was gone. The man who sat before her was a partner. Together, he agreed. The thaw came 2 weeks later. It arrived not as a gentle melt, but as a series of surrenders. The snow, piled 10 feet deep around the mining cabin, grew heavy, wet, and gray. The roof began to drip. The world outside, which had been silent and white, now hissed and gurgled with the sound of returning water. Elijah's wound had closed. It was a puckered, angry scar on his side, a permanent reminder, but his strength had returned, honed by the scarce food and the sharp, cold air. He was leaner than he had been, the last of his solitary softness carved away. What was left was a quiet, dangerous resolve. He and Mara had spoken little of the future. They lived day to day, their partnership forged in the rituals of survival. He had taught her to read the snow, to track a ptarmigan. She had cared for his wound, her touch firm and sure. They slept side by side, sharing the single blanket, a warmth that was about life, not just desire. They were two parts of a whole, a single unit of defiance. "It's time," he said one morning, watching a cascade of snow slide from a high pine bough. Mara was already packing the last of the jerked rabbit meat and the handful of flour. She nodded. "Hatcher first." The descent from the mountain was a treacherous, sodden mess. They moved through a world of slush and mud, their legs aching. The land that had been their prison was now letting them go. When they finally reached the valley floor, the air was warmer, smelling of damp earth and rot. They bypassed Deadwater, circling wide, keeping to the trees. They saw the smoke from the town, but their destination was Bear Canyon. Amos Hatcher was on his porch, splitting kindling. When he saw them, he dropped the axe. He had assumed, as the rest of the town had, that the fire at the Rourke homestead had claimed its final victims. He thought Rourke and the ghost girl were dead. "My God," he whispered, as they walked out of the trees, gaunt, armed, and alive. "We need you, Amos," Elijah said, his voice flat. He did not waste time with greetings. "Rourke, I heard the fire, and Cain." "Cain is alive," Mara said, her voice cutting through his stammering. "He's wounded. He thinks we're dead." She stepped onto the porch. She was no longer the haunted girl who had visited him weeks ago. Her eyes were hard. "You're going to come with us. You're going to tell Judge Harlan what you told us." Hatcher looked at Elijah, who stood like a stone. He looked at Mara, who looked like she would drag him to town herself. The old man's guilt, which he had lived with for 10 years, was finally facing its reckoning. He let out a long, shaky breath. He was old, and he was tired of being a coward. "He killed the Griggs boy," Hatcher whispered. "Jeb, Silas is laid up, half mad with grief, but he's healing. Cain, he's got the whole valley terrified. He's put a claim on your land. Rourke filed it the day after the fire. Says you're dead. Says the girl was a fraud. He's winning." "Not anymore," Elijah said. He looked at the old ex-sheriff. "Get your coat and your gun." The three of them riding into Deadwater was a sight that stopped the town. It was late afternoon, the muddy street thick with wagon ruts. Mrs. Finch, sweeping her boardwalk, froze. The men in front of the saloon went quiet. They saw Elijah Rourke, whom they believed dead. They saw the dark-haired woman, the center of all the violent rumors. And they saw Amos Hatcher, his old sheriff's badge pinned crookedly to his coat. They walked as one, their boots squelching in the mud, and went straight to the small building that served as the judge's office and the town hall. Judge Harlan was a thin, dry man, a follower of paper and ink. He looked up, his pen scratching to a halt. "Mr. Rourke?" It was presumed. "That is the filing from Mr. Cain." "Mr. Cain is a murderer," Mara said, stepping forward. She untied the oilskin packet she had guarded for the entire journey, the one thing she had saved from the mining cabin. She laid it on the judge's desk. "What is this?" he asked. "My mother's journal." She opened it. The pages were filled with Clara's small, neat hand. She pointed to a page. "Here, my birth, in St. Louis, My father, Marshal Kane. She details the years he held her captive. She turned the pages. Here, her escape, her finding Elijah, her fear that Kane would find her. Her finger landed on the last entries, written in pencil, the hand shakier. Here, the night of the fire, she writes that Kane was there. He had found her. She heard him on the porch. She fled out the back window into the storm, just before he set the cabin ablaze, believing her inside. She ran, and she never looked back, because she knew he would believe her dead. Judge Harlan read, his face growing paler. "It's a lie," a voice snarled. Silas Griggs stood in the doorway, his arm in a sling, his face a mess of purple bruises. "She's a whore, like her mother. She's poisoned Rourke." "That's enough, Silas," Hatcher said, stepping forward. The badge on his chest seemed to give him a strength he had not possessed in a decade. "Judge, I have a confession to make, one that's 10 years overdue." Hatcher told his story. The payoff, the $500, the order from Kane to declare Clara Rourke dead and the case closed. Judge Harlan looked from the journal, to Hatcher's shamed face, to Elijah's cold fury. The paper and ink had been a lie. I will issue a warrant for Mr. Kane's arrest, for murder, for conspiracy. Silas, you're an accomplice." "You ain't arresting no one," Silas sneered, his hand moving to his pistol. Elijah was faster. His rifle was up, the muzzle pressed to Silas's forehead before the man could even clear his holster. "You'll stand down." "Silas, it's over." "He's at the churchyard," Silas spat, his eyes wild with hate. "He's waiting for you. He knew you'd come. He said you were rats that had to be smoked out one last time." Elijah took Silas's pistol and shoved him into a chair. "Amos, watch him." He looked at the judge. "Are you coming?" The judge, to his credit, grabbed an old shotgun from the wall. "This town, we will have order." The churchyard was at the end of the street, on a small, muddy hill. The church itself was a simple, whitewashed building, its steeple bare against the gray sky. Marshal Kane was standing by the gate, as if he were waiting for a carriage. His left arm was in a fine silk sling, his shoulder clearly injured, but he was dressed immaculately in a black suit. He was alone. "So," Kane called out, his voice smooth and untroubled. "The dead walk. It's a tiresome miracle." Elijah and Mara fanned out, using the few gravestones for cover. The judge and Hatcher stayed back, by the street. "It's over. Kane," Elijah called, his rifle steady. "The judge has the journal." Hatcher confessed. "You'll hang." Kane laughed. It was a dry, unpleasant sound. "Hang? Men like me don't hang. Men like you hang. Vagrants, drunks, liars." He looked at Mara, his gaze cold and assessing. "You should have stayed in Denver. Girl, you should have kept your mother's secrets. She died in shame, as she deserved, for stealing from me, for taking what was mine." "She was never yours," Mara said, her voice clear and carrying in the still air. "And neither am I." "Possession is a simple matter, my dear," Kane said. He reached inside his coat with his good hand. "It's about who is willing to do what is necessary." He was not reaching for a letter. He pulled a small, silver-plated derringer. He did not aim at Elijah. He aimed at Mara. Elijah fired, the same instant. Kane's shot went wild, the derringer spinning from his hand as Elijah's bullet tore through his good wrist. Kane screamed, a high, thin sound of rage and agony. He stumbled back, clutching his ruined hand. His mask of civility finally, completely gone. Elijah was on him. He moved like a wolf, his rifle discarded. He slammed Kane against the churchyard fence, his forearm on the man's throat. He pulled his pistol, the one he had taken from Silas, and jammed the muzzle under Kane's chin. Kane's eyes were wide, panicked. He was choking. The man who had destroyed so many lives was now just a terrified, bleeding creature. Elijah's thumb pulled the hammer back. The click was deafeningly loud. He saw it all. The 10 years of empty grief. The burned cabin. Clara, dead in a charity ward. The fire. The blood in the snow. He saw this man's face, and all he wanted was to pull the trigger, to end the poison. Elijah. Mara's voice. She was beside him. She did not raise her gun. She put her hand on his arm, the one holding the pistol. Her grip was firm. He didn't look at her. He earned this. I know, she said, her voice quiet but absolute. But we didn't. He was trembling, his rage so potent it was a physical sickness. He'll walk free. Men like him, they don't hang. He will, she said. We have the truth. We have the law. Look at him. Elijah looked. Cain was weeping, snot and tears running down his face. He was nothing. We are not like him, Elijah. I will not let you become him. His finger was tight on the trigger. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He let out a long, shuddering breath. The rage did not leave, but it receded, like a poisoned tide. He slowly, agonizingly, lowered the hammer. He stepped back, pulling Mara with him. Judge Harlan and Amos Hatcher ran up, their guns raised. They saw Cain, bleeding and broken. They saw Elijah, trembling but in control. Marshal Cain, the judge said, his voice shaking but finding its authority. You are under arrest for the murder of Jeb Griggs, the attempted murder of Elijah Rourke and Mara Rourke, and the conspiracy to conceal the death of Clara Rourke 10 years ago. As Hatcher bound Cain's hands, the townsfolk began to emerge. They had watched from their windows. They saw the richest, most powerful man to ever set foot in Deadwater led away in chains, bleeding in the mud by their old, disgraced sheriff. The whispers, this time, were different. They were in awe. They were in shock. The next day, the town had shifted. As Mara and Elijah bought supplies at the mercantile, their credit suddenly, miraculously good. Mrs. Finch pressed a small bag of sugar into Mara's hand. For your trouble, dear, she said, not quite meeting her eye. Men on the street, men who had once looked through Elijah, now nodded. Mr. Rourke. Some still turned their backs. The Griggs family had friends. The world was not made clean in a day, but it had changed. The truth, once unearthed, had weight. That evening, they rode back to the homestead, or what was left of it. The new cabin was a pile of blackened timber. The barn was half collapsed. The fire had taken everything. Again, they stood on the hill, where Elijah had buried the pine box of ashes 10 years ago. The sun was setting, staining the high clouds pink and orange. He'll be tried in Helena, Elijah said. With Hatcher's testimony and the journal, he won't walk free. I know, Mara said. She was quiet for a long time. What will you do? He asked, his voice low. You have money now? The judge said, with Cain's assets frozen, your mother's claim. You'll have enough. You can go anywhere. Back east, California. Mara looked down at the valley, the dark ribbon of Deadwater Creek. She looked at the blackened ruin of the cabin, and the older, overgrown scar of the first one. This land had seen so much pain. It had been her mother's prison, her mother's sanctuary, and her mother's grave. She knelt, touching the soil. It was cold, but the frost was gone. It was just damp, dark earth, waiting. She loved it here, Mara whispered, before him. She loved this land. She wrote about it in the journal, the sky, the quiet. She stood up. I'm not running. I'm staying. Elijah looked at her, his heart a tight, aching knot in his chest. There's nothing left. It's all gone. No, she said, turning to him. She placed her hand on his chest. We're still here. We can rebuild. He did not rebuild on the old foundations. He chose a spot on higher ground, a small rise that caught the morning sun and looked out over the valley. He built it with his own hands, But this time, Mara was there. She helped him. She carried stones for the new, wider fireplace. She learned to notch the logs. He taught her, and she learned. The house they built was stronger than the last. It was brighter. He built open windows, ones that let the light pour in. He built a wide porch for sitting, not for hiding. And inside, he built a fire that warmed instead of one that burned. They lived in the repaired barn through the build, and as the months passed, the rhythm of their life found its own peace. The shared work, the quiet meals, the nights spent together. Their love, born in trauma and sealed in violence, settled. It became a deep, quiet, unbreakable thing. One night, the next winter, they sat before their new hearth. The fire was warm. The cabin was filled with the smell of pine and roasting meat. Elijah was reading a Stockman's Gazette. Mara sat in a rocker, the small, oilskin packet in her lap. She had not opened it since the trial. She pulled out the journal. She ran her fingers over her mother's handwriting. She turned to the very last page. It was a single paragraph, written in the Denver infirmary, just before she had given the journal to Mara. It was not addressed to anyone. She read it aloud, her voice soft in the warm room. I am done. The fear is gone. There is only the quiet. If he reads this, tell him I forgive him. And I hope he forgives himself. Elijah froze. The Gazette slipped from his hands. He stared into the fire. He had thought, in Denver, that she meant Cain. Then he had thought she meant him. Now, he did not know. Maybe she meant both. Maybe she had just meant everyone. He had not wept since the night they first came together. But now, the last of the poison, the last of the 10-year-old guilt, finally broke free. It was not the violent sob of a man in torment. It was the quiet, steady tears of a man being released. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook. Mara set the journal aside. She knelt in front of him. She did not speak. She just held him. She pulled his head to her shoulder and held him as the last of the ghost finally, truly, left the house. Their love was not about ghosts anymore. It was rooted in the hard, terrible, beautiful truth. It was rooted in their shared pain and in the simple, profound fact of their survival. The last of the snow was melting. Spring had come, hesitant at first, and then in a rush of green. The creek was high and loud. The air smelled of mud and new life. Mara walked barefoot through the garden plot Elijah had tilled. The soil was dark, rich, and cold, squelching between her toes. She held a small cloth sack of seeds. She was no longer a shadow. She was earth. She was real. Elijah watched her from the porch. He watched the way she bent to the task, her dark hair loose in the breeze. He walked out to her, his boots leaving marks in the soft ground. He stood beside her. He didn't speak. He just placed his hand over hers as she held the seeds, and then he moved his hand, resting it gently over her belly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Life had begun again. The ghosts were still there, in the valley, in the names of the mountains, in the scar on his side, but they were ghosts. And on the porch, in the warm spring sun, hope was real. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to hear from you. Please comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you never miss a chapter. And finally, please share your thoughts with us in English. We look forward to hearing from you.